We got this hilarious video last year of the Molly's pack. It was a trail that was near their den, and they were just walking by it every single day, multiple times a day, not even carrying food most of the time. It was just toys for the pups, because I think that instinct to bring something back is so strong that they'll just grab anything, whether it's...
Thank you for joining us on the Voices of Greater Yellowstone podcast, where we share the stories and science of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. I'm your host, Emmy Reed, and I'm so excited to share this very special episode with you. Wolves in Greater Yellowstone represent one of the greatest conservation success stories. Once absent from the ecosystem, a reintroduction nearly 30 years ago brought back this keystone species to the landscape. Today, Yellowstone wolves are renowned across the world and represent a significant economic driver through wildlife watching and tourism, generating an estimated $82 million annually. Their presence in Yellowstone National Park has also allowed researchers to conduct multi-year studies on their biology and effect on the landscape and wildlife around them. On the podcast, we'll get to chat with one of those researchers, Cassidy. Kira is a research associate for the Yellowstone Wolf Project, the group that works within Yellowstone National Park to study these iconic wolves. Her research projects include wolf territoriality, sociality, and behavior. She also develops science communication strategies about wildlife research using art, writing, and public speaking. I'm thrilled she agreed to join us on the podcast, so without further ado, let's jump in. So Kira, welcome to the podcast. We're so excited you're here with us today. Thanks for driving up from Yellowstone.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So why wolves? Why did you find your path towards studying them?
I was always kind of like the dog-obsessed little kid. I remember my mom telling me that every time I walked out of the library, I had a stack of books, and every single one had an animal on the cover. But I kind of had shifted away from wildlife when I went to college. I ended up getting a natural resource degree for my undergrad, and that was partly just to kind of protect myself and make it easier to find a job with a little bit more of broad experience, soil science, silviculture, fire ecology, and also some wildlife stuff in there. But after I finished that undergrad, I came out to Yellowstone and kind of, regressed to that little dog-obsessed kid that was like, oh, I love being outside, and that's what I really want to do for my work, but being able to study wildlife, going about their day-to-day life, collecting observations, analyzing the data, that all of a sudden brought all of these things together, some of which I didn't even know existed really in the world out there where you could do it as a profession. And so thankfully, there was a position that was opening. I volunteered for a couple of winters, and then a position that opened where I could go out in the field every day, working through Yellowstone Forever for the Yellowstone Wolf Project in the park. And from there, I went to graduate school and then came back to Yellowstone after I finished that degree. And now I'm in a research associate position.
Awesome. So you're living your childhood dream.
I really am. Yeah.
Hanging out with the wolves, just basically dogs.
Exactly.
I can totally relate. I went out to Yellowstone for the first time in the 90s when I was a kid with my family, and came back and was just like, wolves. That's what I am going to be obsessed with, I think, for a little bit. And penned my first, I think, conservation communications piece in 4th grade about Yellowstone wolves, and was like, this is why they're cool, and this is why they're back in the ecosystem. And I, funnily enough, like to think of that as my first little entry point into this realm of talking about conservation. And
so early,
right? It's like, oh man, I've been really set on this path for a while. So, there are so many things that one can study about any animal, but with wolves in particular, why did you choose your specific focuses? And so you study wolf territoriality and sociality and behavior. Did you choose that, or was that something that was just more so available and you fit yourself into that?
Yeah, so after wolves were reintroduced, there have been a number of people that have worked in Yellowstone, gone on to graduate work, who were choosing projects that made the most sense for like the first things that you would study: their impacts on prey, their impacts on the ecosystem, their movements, their survival, their reproduction. And by the time I came along, 15 years in or so, the social dynamics within the pack, and then also between packs that are neighbors, so territoriality, hadn't really been touched by anybody research-wise. And they had been collecting the data, and when I was one of the field researchers out there collecting data every day, it was one of those things that I saw a handful of times, two packs running into each other and fighting, and I was pretty fascinated by that. But had I tried to do that project, that was for my master's, had I tried to do that project just in the normal time frame of a master's, 2 or 3 years, I never would have been able to get enough data. So thankfully I could go back all the way back to 1995 and therefore use 16 or 17 years worth of data that had been collected, because it's just so episodic in a wolf's life. They might run into a neighbor every month or two, and actually fight even less than that. And so working in a place where you can use long-term data is just so incredibly lucky as a scientist, and spoiled, really. Like, that's how I feel in Yellowstone. Like, I'm just this spoiled person that has, in some cases, thousands and thousands of data points at my disposal for research, and so many other people studying animals, even large carnivores, don't have that opportunity. And so I just feel like swimming in data in the absolute best way possible.
Yes, this is like definitely the scientist way. And I'll admit myself, and I'm sure many others as well, like can really like glamorize your job. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I bet Kira's up in the airplane today, and she's probably like counting wolves and doing, all the amazing things that I know this job does entail. But I'm sure there are also the not so glamorous days as well. So
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about what a really exciting day in your job looks like? And then, what's kind of the behind the scenes? What's something that you're working on that people don't necessarily maybe think of when they hear wolf biologist?
Right. So really exciting day. Every year, maybe 5 or 6 days in the middle of the winter, we bring in a helicopter and we capture some of the wolves to put on radio collars. We usually end up doing 15 to 20 wolves during those few days. And that's for sure the most exciting time. It is stressful because, we have to put the wolves through this kind of like little bit of a stressful scenario where they're chased by a helicopter and then captured and drugged. We have a very experienced team, thankfully. So Dan Staler's the project leader right now since Doug Smith retired about 1.5 years ago. Aaron Staler is also works for the Wolf Project and is kind of like the capture extraordinaire, handling extraordinaire. And then Matt Metz is the other research associate currently. And so a group of us are putting out the radio collars. We also take a bunch of samples, trying to get genetics from the wolf. We take a bunch of measurements, check on their health, that kind of stuff. So those days are incredibly exciting. I don't really ever, I try to enjoy it, like sit back, and especially in those quiet few minutes before we leave, when we're all done with the sampling, the wolf is still sedated and sitting there, maybe recovering slowly. I like to take just a few quiet moments to sit there, but generally it's pretty like go, go, go. And I don't really like breathe a sigh of relief until the next day, when they're always back with their pack overnight. And so sometimes even just a few hours later. And so the next day, when we know the collar's working, we know the wolf is fine and healthy and back with their family, that's when I kind of like replay it in my mind and enjoy it. So stressful and exciting, I should say.
Do you guys try to get a radio collar on at least every pack?
Yeah, we try to keep at least one radio collar on each pack, because inevitably a wolf will die or disperse or something. So About a quarter of the population is collared, which means that there's like 2, maybe 3 in each pack. And an average pack is about 10 wolves or so. So at any time, we have maybe 25 to 30 radio collars out there in about the 10 packs that we follow. There are other really exciting days too, even just like getting to go out into the field. My job is a little bit more office-based in the last decade or so because of that long-term research. But getting out in the field is always some of my favorite stuff, whether it's hiking in to put up a trail camera, or we actually have these audio recording units that we've been using recently, so we put those up too. Or if a wolf dies, like I have done a ton of necropsies during the time that I've been working here, and it is one of the more exciting, like solve the mystery kind of a thing where you go out and do the necropsy, oftentimes in the field, to try to figure out the cause of death and collect the samples that we take from a dead wolf. And it's also, I think, a really kind of touching, really profound kind of feeling to be exactly where a wild animal died. Because you can't help but try and kind of like imagine the circumstances that led to that death. And that might sound a little bit like, why are you seeking that out? But I think as a scientist, it connects me with an animal in a different way from the capture, because that's, very, it's our choice. And we make sure that we're making that choice to collar the animal for the right reasons and only when necessary. And then the deaths are often natural. And so there's just like this inherently bittersweet beauty in a death that is happening to a wild animal in a wild place that is natural. And I just get to be this observer for a second of that.
Well, that sounds both fascinating and maybe not exactly what I would expect. A lot of office time, but hey, that's important when you're doing this work. So let's talk a bit about the wolves themselves. Throughout the years, the packs and the number of wolves fluctuates from year to year. What's the current makeup of wolves in Yellowstone National Park?
Yeah, let's see. We're in the spring now, and new pups were just born a couple of weeks ago, and only one litter has kind of come up above ground that we've seen so far. That's the Junction Butte pack. 907 is the lead female. She's the oldest wolf in the park, and she had her 10th litter this year.
Oh my gosh.
Which is a record as far as I know, at least a record in Yellowstone. With those new pups, there's all of a sudden a lot more wolves out there, but we just don't know. There's probably, at least one litter in each pack right now. But as far as adults go, there's about 100.
Okay.
And each year, I would bet that there's somewhere around 50 pups that are born if each pack has one litter, and a litter is 4 or 5 pups. So we may be looking at 150 wolves in Yellowstone right now, but our official counts really aren't until the end of the calendar year, midwinter. And almost every year we have right around 100 to 110 wolves. And over the last 15 years, that has changed very little, statistically almost like a straight line. This last year was slightly higher. It was 124 at the end of 2023. But we had a few packs that were fairly large, one pack that has since left the park and shifted more into Wyoming, so we're not counting them anymore, but fairly stable for a long time now.
Interesting. So Yellowstone I'm guessing then has a bit of a threshold on its wolf population where, do you think it's kind of hit certain levels where, we likely won't see 300 wolves within the park? You think it's kind of at the point where it's like a pretty comfortable number for what the park can provide?
Yeah, wolf numbers are really anywhere wolves live. They're going to be driven by first of all, people. But if you're looking at a protected place like Yellowstone, they're going to be driven by the number of prey that they have available to them, and then also the number of wolves, so how many competitors they have out there. And so because they are so territorial and they will kill each other if they run into each other. It's actually their number one cause of mortality in Yellowstone. We won't, even if all of a sudden the elk population and the deer population and the bison populations all skyrocketed for some weird theoretical reason, we would never have a scenario where the wolf numbers also skyrocket because they are too territorial to just allow, uncontrolled numbers of them in a certain area. That's kind of just like the math / ecology version of that. But yeah, I think given the number of elk and bison, of which they're eating more recently, so they're kind of splitting their diet now between elk and bison, I would expect that we'll probably see between 80 to 120 wolves pretty much every year, unless something super dramatic changes with prey.
Interesting. So you're seeing wolves become more prolific at hunting bison, when I feel like for quite some time that was maybe the prey they didn't go after as much. And now I think maybe it was, was it the Molly's pack that was really proficient at, like, that was kind of what they were known for, was hunting bison, or was that a different pack?
Yeah, no, you have that right.
Okay.
So in the early years after reintroduction, there were so many elk in northern Yellowstone. The northern range elk herd alone, I think, was close to 20,000. That was part of the reason wolves were brought back, to try and bring that population closer to reasonable, like ecologically healthy numbers. That did happen, although the timing was with wolf reintroduction, but there was also increasing cougars, increasing grizzly bears. There was a continuation of a late elk hunting season in Gardner that was for the express purpose of reducing that elk herd, targeting prime-aged females. And so with all of those things together, the elk population did go down that decade or so after wolf reintroduction. And yeah, if that changed for some reason going into the future, I think that the wolf population could respond. But this isn't an island. You see in ecology, there's the very classic seesaw relationship between snowshoe hares and lynx. When the snowshoe hare population goes up, the lynx population goes up. And then they're in balance, and then the snowshoe hare population goes down and the lynx go down. Yellowstone is so much more of a complicated system than just two species. And they've all co-evolved together too for tens of thousands of years, if not longer. And so, we can expect that we won't see these like really dramatic shifts just involving two species. There's kind of all of these things. The food web is classically complicated.
Right. Yeah. I remember when it almost like even made that shift where it was kind of just like a food, what was it, like a line, and then it became more of this like interconnected, like everything is affecting each other. The food chain. I don't know why that took me a sec to get to, but I remember. And then, it's so much more interconnected than, just as you said, these two species are interacting together, and it's always evolving and always changing. So, Kira, do you have a favorite either individual wolf that you've studied over the years, or do you have a specific pack that you've always really admired, or is just a pack that maybe is really remarkable that you'd like to share about?
It's so hard to choose a favorite wolf. I feel like that changes all the time.
Yeah.
But I've always been really fascinated by the Molly's pack. They were brought down to Yellowstone the very first year. They were actually called the Crystal Creek Pack at first, but the name did change in about the year 2000. They quickly made Pelican Valley their home within about a year of that reintroduction, when the Druid Pack was brought in and kind of shifted out of that area in Lamar. They have now lived in Pelican since 1996. And so over 29 years now, they're the only pack that has lived in the same spot for so long. And wolves are matrilineal, so the territory gets passed down through the female line. And so usually from mother to daughter, or like older sister to younger sister. And the Molly's pack has had this series of long-lived leaders, both male and female, with the territory passing down generally through the female line. There was one case where it switched to the male line briefly when all the females in the pack died. But since then, it's switched back to the female line. And they have always fascinated me. I don't know if it's because we've had radio collars on them very consistently. And so we just know their stories. So many people will bring up a specific wolf to me and ask, like, why is this one has such a fascinating life? And sometimes that is the case. There's like some really cool stories out there. But I think most of the time it's just because there are some that we have radio collared, that we recognize at an individual level, that happen to live really long, and we know their story. There are tons of them out there that we don't know their stories, that are living amazing, unique, really dramatic lives out there. And so I'm not trying to avoid your question about the unique ones. I do want to say that I just think that they're kind of all fascinating.
Right.
And it's not a cop-out. The mollies are for sure one of my favorite ones, that when I can see them, and usually that's from the air because their territory is not really in a place where we can see them from the ground very often. So when we're doing tracking flights with our pilot, so it's just a tiny little plane where he's in front of me and I'm sitting in a tiny little seat behind him, and we are it's a Piper Super Cub plane, so a single engine. And we have an antenna on the wings and track the wolves, eventually circle around them and get counts, take photos to try and see what they're eating or how many pups they have. And, those days where we can track the mollies and find them and get a little glimpse of their wildlife, those are some pretty great days.
I can imagine. Oh my gosh. Is it true that they're spending a little more time in the Lamar Valley?
Yeah, just recently, this last spring, they actually spent, it was at least a month straight in the valley. They might have gone back home now. We haven't heard them in the valley in a few days. But all of the males in Molly's actually are originally from the Junction Butte Pack. And so I think that kind of helped. They were
a little homesick, maybe.
Kind of home. Yeah, exactly. And it was a fairly mild winter, really. That makes it a little bit harder for the Molly's Pack to hunt bison, which is the only thing that's really left in their core territory in the winter.
Right.
Which is great for them in a severe winter, like in 2022, 23. All they had to do was sit there and wait, and bison would die or become so weak that they could bring them down relatively easily. And this year they just couldn't do that because there wasn't enough snow. And so they did have to travel more widely, come up to the northern range looking for elk. And so I think that was just kind of hanging on from the winter for them as well. The alpha female in Molly's, which is fairly new, she hasn't been a leader for super long. She is denning, and I think she just wasn't getting a ton of help from those ones that were in Lamar.
Good Lord.
But some packs, there's a huge variation in how much help a wolf will have or will bring to the denning female. Some of them know really well what to do, especially like her mate, the lead male in the pack. He's usually back and forth bringing her food a ton. But then other ones that are just turning 1 year old or 2 year old, they might not really know. They don't really have the experience.
Sure.
Last year they were babies themselves. And so their whole life has either been they're doted on or they're traveling around with the pack constantly, and they're not kind of tied down to this one area. It's a really fascinating time of year because the den kind of acts like the hub on a wheel where wolves will leave and go get food and come back. In all different directions, and not necessarily all together. They can go off on their own or just in pairs or trios, finding smaller things like elk calves right now. Elk calves are just starting to be born. And so they'll bring those back to the den, and they have such a strong instinct to bring things back to the den too. They all have a huge spike in prolactin, which is the caregiving hormone, even the big males in the pack. And that kind of makes them want to carry something to the den, whether it's in their stomach and they regurgitate it or carry it in their mouth. And we got this hilarious video last year of the Molly's pack It was a trail that was near their den, and they were just walking by it every single day, multiple times a day, not even carrying food most of the time. It was just toys for the pups, because I think that instinct to bring something back is so strong that they'll just grab anything, whether it's a antler or a bone. There was a wolf with a branch. There was one with what looked like someone had cut firewood and had a big chunk of firewood. We've also found really fun things at the dens when we go check them out after the wolves are gone and take measurements and things. But they'll bring like traffic cones back, which to me seems like the best chew toy for a group of wolf pups.
That's the favorite uncle or aunt
Yes.
that's brought back the giant orange cone. Was that the video you posted on your Instagram maybe a while ago?
Yes.
Okay.
The park, the public affair, we sent them all these videos from our trail camera, and they compiled this really adorable video with a funny song that just kind of showed one after the other these wolves bringing toys back.
Okay, I'll make sure to include that in the show notes so you guys can check it out too.
Yeah. There's so much media out there about wolves, and so much of it is either negative or highlights the controversy, that it was so nice to have just like a feel-good, fun video out there.
Oh, it was adorable. I probably watched it several times because they were just like, they're doing their little trot with, like you could tell there was an antler in there, a stick, all those good things. So Kira, who's Molly? Who's the pack named after?
Yeah, the Molly's pack was named after Molly Beatty, and she was the first female director of the Fish and Wildlife Service. She worked really hard. I never met her. She worked really hard to get wolves reintroduced to Yellowstone. And she was actually present for some of the releases in 1995. She sadly died about a year after, but the pack was named in her honor. And it's really cool that it's one of those packs that has lasted so long, because most of them don't. And then also that they've had that series of really strong female leaders along the way too, which I think is...
I love that. What a good
yeah.
tribute to her.
Absolutely.
And for what she did for wolves in Yellowstone, just wolves in general. That's really special. I'm glad that they're still hanging around and giving her a good namesake. So, Kira, I'm sure we've got some big wolf fans listening in today. And maybe what is something you can share with us, or a few things if you can, that maybe even like the most dedicated wolf enthusiasts may not know about wolves?
Let's see. So now that we have almost 30 years worth of long-term data, we are starting to dive more into studies that involve like social dynamics. And that has fascinated me for a while, because whenever you watch animals, whether it's domestic ones or wild ones where you can recognize individuals, you start to really quickly see that there are different temperaments and personalities. Like some of them are just more bold than other ones, and some are very shy, and some are gregarious, and some are totally fine being alone. And just the variation in personalities is so fascinating to me that we're starting to come up with tons of different questions in that realm. The leaders of the wolf pack, which is generally the elderly ones. So I mentioned 907, she just turned 11 years old, but anything over 6 is really considered elderly in the wolf world. Not very many of them even make it that old. And so there are probably only about 9 or 10 wolves in the whole park right now that are considered elderly, but they are critical to the success of their pack, whether it be in avoiding humans, which is important, avoiding other packs, or beating other packs if they're going to fight them in one of those territorial fights. The packs that have the elderly ones are the ones more likely to be successful. And it surprised me at first, because I thought like when 2 packs fight, you're going to have the ones that are big and strong be the ones that are the most important. But it turned out that having those elderly ones, which aren't really fighting, they aren't really even hunting that much anymore, they're letting the younger pack mates do that, it's just their presence. And
Wow.
I started comparing it to all of these really cool studies on other species that live in these big groups, like elephants, orcas, humans, of course, other things like chimpanzees, where during a really stressful event, the entire group looks to the elder because they have, in the scientific literature, this is called being a knowledge repository. So the ones that are basically have the most experience because of their age. And so the other ones look to them during that really stressful event to what should we do? You know, for an elephant that might be during a drought, they look to the matriarch to find where there's water. She remembers where there was water the last time there was a drought. Maybe it was 40 years ago. The orcas look to the grandmother. She actually goes through menopause, similar to humans do. So she doesn't have her own calves, but she's helping to raise her grand calves. But when there's a salmon shortage, they just follow her. She knows where to go. It's very similar in a wolf's life when there are really dangerous things happening, like we ran into our neighbor that has a bunch more wolves than us. What should we do? They all look to that elder one, and the elders get them through they're more likely to get them through safely, even if they're outnumbered. And that was really fascinating to me. Some people who have maybe heard me present on this might have heard that one before, but we're kind of expanding on that theme of the importance of elders, the importance of leaders in all kinds of different measures of wolf success, whether it's at the pack level, like the Mollies have been exceptionally successful over the years, or at the individual level, you know, the value of the elderly on the survival of the rest of them, on reproduction, kind of all different kinds of things that you might imagine being considered a success for a wolf.
Right. Do you guys have any thoughts on why maybe an individual wolf might be, I don't know, like set up to maybe reach that elderly age? Do you find that there's any traits, or is it maybe that kind of the pack dynamics, you know, maybe it's larger and would, you know, give wolves the ability to kind of make it easier for wolves to age because of the security of the pack? Have you noticed anything there?
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot recently now that 907 turned 11, because it's such an exceptionally old age. Only about 1 out of every 250 or so that are born will reach the age of 11. We've only had 5 others besides her, so 6 total. And what she did throughout her life, there's probably a level of luck to it, of course.
Sure.
But, you know, she was lucky enough to have been born in Yellowstone, which is a protected area. She inherited her territory from her aunt, and so she's been living in this protected area her entire life. And then also there are things that she has done throughout her life to reduce her risks of dying. So the number one cause of mortality is running into a neighboring pack and being killed. She has lived in a really large pack, often with some elders in the pack, whether it was when she was young and they were her aunts and uncles and mother and father, or when she got to be elderly, her sisters, her mate now is 9 years old, so he's pretty elderly too. And they at one point lived in a pack of 35, which is the third largest ever recorded anywhere, as far as I know, in the world, at least in North America.
Oh, where's the largest ever been found?
There was a group of wolves, 42 wolves seen in Wood Buffalo National Park.
Oh, cool.
By a biologist one time from the plane, but it was unknown whether it was actually a single pack together or if it was like a couple different packs that had just fought and they were all kind of just like standing around in this big valley. So a little bit unknown about that, number one. So she has lived in that big pack, which helps protect her, almost insulate her from being killed by other wolves. The second leading cause of death is being kicked or gored by an elk or a bison or a moose or something. And as she's gotten older, she takes more of a backseat to the big dangerous hunts and allows her younger pack mates to do those things. So that helps her survival go up. She also, I think, is very smart. She knows she doesn't hang out on the road. I've seen wolves look both ways before they cross the road, but she doesn't really spend a lot of time near like dangerous, busy roads. She doesn't spend a lot of time outside the park, exposed to like the hunting seasons outside the park. In Montana, mostly that's where that pack kind of borders. And yeah, if she's been successful kind of reducing those 3 most dangerous things that a wolf can run into, other wolves, big prey, and humans, then just their odds of living to be elderly go up more and more, and then being pretty just darn lucky.
Right. Yeah. Luck has always got to be an element in there, but that's really fascinating. I really love that you guys are, studying more on how the role of elderly individuals plays to long-term pack success. Kira, can you share like any other interesting discoveries you and your team have maybe made in the past few years?
Yeah, there's a really cool there's a couple, the whole team is working on different fascinating projects. Right now, Matt Metz, another of the research associates, is publishing work on basically the switch from this wolf elk system to a wolf elk and bison system, as they've been eating more bison. As bison numbers have increased, elk numbers have decreased. Wolves' diet has reflected that exactly. And part of that is through scavenging. Part of that is actually hunting and killing them. Some packs are pretty good at it. And then Jack Raby, another person who's working with us, he's a graduate student at the University of Minnesota. He's looking at this cool topic on competition between cougars, wolves, and bears, and how cougars are kind of bumped off of their kills sometimes by wolves and bears. There's not a whole lot that they can do about it. So they'll kind of have to leave their kill. But as elk numbers have gone down, mountain lions or cougars have kind of switched to eating a bit more deer. And that has actually reduced competition because the elk or the bears and the wolves are less likely to take over a deer kill. The cougars can finish it quicker. It's a little bit easier to hide maybe. And so there's like this really interesting shift in prey numbers, which manifests in changes in competition between predators. Brenna Cassidy, who's my younger sister.
I love that. Keeping it in the family.
Yeah, she has been working on her PhD, finding really cool things on wolf survival, especially related to hunting seasons outside of Yellowstone, and also showing that the number of natural deaths don't really change from one year to the next, which finds that human-caused mortality is additive to this natural mortality that we record. And so really cool, like, vital rate and ecology projects. We recently published a study about toxoplasmosis in wolves in Yellowstone. They get it from cougars in Yellowstone. It's a parasite that relies on a felid host, but in any kind of warm-blooded animal that it infects, it's been found to have potentially behavioral changes because of hormone tinkering that the parasite does. And it actually makes animals more likely to take risks. So the wolves that had it were more likely to disperse. They were more likely to become pack leaders. Humans that have been found to have it are more likely to, or people who like get into a motorcycle accident are more likely to have it than the normal population. People who are entrepreneurs are more likely to have it. It's generally not a super dangerous parasite if you're otherwise healthy. It can be very dangerous to pregnant people. Yeah. It can hurt the fetus and maybe even cause miscarriages and things. That's why most people will have heard of it just from talking to a doctor during pregnancy. Right. Don't change the cat litter box. Yes, you don't want to get it. But worldwide, I think some estimates are that 30% of people already have it. And so most people have it and don't even know. And it does the same thing. It kind of tinkers with hormones in a way that makes people a bit more risk-taking or changes their decision-making behavior a little bit, just more likely to do things that otherwise might be really stressful for other people, starting a new business or driving a motorcycle. Same thing with wolves. And that was a really fun project to work on.
Cool. I love that. So Kira, I think, whether you like it or not, conservation is really tied into your work. Wolves have been a species that was not found in this ecosystem. And of course they were brought back, and now luckily they're doing really well. It's really, I think, about cementing their future and like making sure that they can really thrive for years to come. So, what are you seeing, probably especially in Montana along that northern border? What are you seeing in conservation and policies, and how is it affecting both your work and just the wolf dynamic in general in Yellowstone?
Yeah. Part of our long-term monitoring and research involves keeping track of the wolves that are hunted outside of Yellowstone from these packs that we follow year round. And we've tried to calculate, how much time are they spending in the park versus out of the park. And recently those numbers have been 96% of their time within Yellowstone boundaries. So only 4% of their time outside of Yellowstone, which is very little. It might be as much as, I think that equals out to about 15 days out of an entire year. Usually kind of spread out, a couple days here, a couple days there. And, the hunting seasons outside of Yellowstone, even though wolves might only spend a few days out there, it doesn't take very long. If they are right in the open or in a place where people can access. And there have been some years where a number of wolves from these Yellowstone packs have been shot or trapped during those legal hunting seasons. And in fact, this wolf hunting season in Montana in 2021 and 22, there was no quota along the north boundary of Yellowstone, and there were 19 wolves from these Yellowstone packs harvested, either hunted or trapped, in those areas that would have normally had a quota. And so we had a lot of conversations, a lot of people, a lot of conservation groups, you guys included, did a ton of work to try and get some of those quotas reinstated. Since then, the quota was brought back and put at 6, which is a great step in the right direction. That expecting an animal that is slightly transboundary to go from an area of total protection to an area of no protection is not really putting them in the best scenario at all. And also kind of expecting them we don't expect them to know where the boundary is between Yellowstone and the areas outside of the park, where there's just different management goals. And so kind of having a little bit more of a transition area in those transboundary zones is really important. And the more we learn about wildlife, the more we learn that especially large mammals need pretty huge spaces in order to be successful. And so whether that's migration routes or for ungulates or, dispersal routes to connect fragmented habitat for large carnivores especially, or just a little area here and there where there are different agencies, different mandates, but a species that's kind of in a family group like we consider wolves, using all of these areas or dipping back and forth into different ones. And so I think wolves can be seen as this success story, and especially in the last couple of years, moving from no quota north of Yellowstone to at least a quota of 6, which is higher than it used to be. And so I think it's a step in the right direction, but there are still small things here and there that will help make that transboundary area at least work a little bit better for everyone involved.
Yeah, I agree. That's it's really hard to see when those numbers were, really more so unchecked, and seeing how it really does affect the wolf stability in the park and affects, the studies that you guys are doing and everything that you're seeing. So thank you for all the work you're doing in that space.
Yeah. We actually followed the packs that have experienced losses due to humans, whether it was legal hunting or poaching or vehicle strikes or whatever. And the packs that have those losses are less likely to persist. So they're more likely to dissolve. The Molly's pack is a good example of a pack that has persisted year after year after year. But there are quite a few places on the northern range of Yellowstone where packs will form and be together for a year or two and then dissolve. And they are usually the ones that are the most exposed to human-caused mortality. And so we have been keeping track of that. We will continue to keep track of that. It just also goes to show the value of the individual wolves too. If a pack loses one of their 6-month-old pups, it usually doesn't really impact them all that much.
Sure.
They have a number of pups each year with kind of the evolutionary expectation that some of them will die. But if they lose one of those leaders, one of the elders, it can hit them pretty hard and makes the rest of the pack just like they lose their stability and they're more likely to dissolve. And we actually did see that happen that year, that there were a bunch of harvests. They're less likely to reproduce the next year if they lose a breeder, especially during the hunting or during the breeding season, or even after when the females are pregnant, of course, because they only breed once a year. But then there are, we haven't studied this directly, but there are some indications in other places that there may be some like compensatory reproduction. So after a pack is disrupted by a human-caused loss, maybe it is the lead female that dies, but then there are a bunch of younger females that are all of a sudden in potentially breeding positions, and maybe all of them have pups. And so now all of a sudden you have more pups than you would if it was just the one female still in the pack. And, that's, for some people, they might assume that I think that that's a good thing because it means more wolves. But if the cause was a human-related disruption, I actually consider that a negative thing. And so that's what we're trying to do, is keep track of human influences. How much are we okay with and what are we not okay with, no matter what like the outcome or the long-term numbers look like. Ideally, we would see as little human impact as possible.
Right. Absolutely. Kira, do you mind if we hop into a few listener questions?
Sure.
Cool. First up, we have Jeff from Montana, who asks, is it true that domesticating wolves to dogs helped our brains develop further?
Oh my gosh, I love this question. The idea or the process of domestication fascinates me. There's a lot of debate in the literature still on exactly how that happened. We do know that it happened in a number of different places, mostly Asia. And then, wolves were brought over dogs were brought over the Bering Land Strait with early humans. But as far as the impact on our brains, I remember reading somewhere, and I would need to double check this, that around the time that wolves were starting to be domesticated into dogs, our brain case actually got a little bit smaller. And this is kind of like a correlational kind of a study. I don't know that we could really figure out whether that was causation or not, but correlation, it kind of like you could come up with some reasonable explanations for that when we all of a sudden have dogs in our lives, which they looked just like wolves, I'm sure at that point. They were essentially, we were able to kind of delegate some of the things that we thought about the most to these wolf dogs. Things like our safety at night, not having to kind of like stay halfway awake at night, worrying that another group of people or a saber tooth or whatever it was, a cave bear was on its way over to our family group or our campfire or whatever it might be. The dogs would be warning us of that before we could ever see or hear such a thing. The dogs are probably smelling it or hearing it. Their senses are so much more stronger than ours, but kind of being able to delegate a lot of that brain power that we use to keep ourselves safe to dogs. I know that I do it with my dog.
Me too.
I just totally rely on him to warn me while I'm hiking in bear country, to warn me. I have had grizzlies walk past my house a few times, and to see his reaction in times where I don't even know how he can smell it through the wall. He knows somehow. And so I just feel so much safer. And for sure, you could see just being able to simply sleep better could help our brain be able to do, use its energy on different things.
Yeah. Why do you think it was wolves? Why were wolves the species and not the saber-toothed tiger or anything else that was around during that time? Why do you think we started having this connection with wolves that eventually evolved into the dogs we have in our lives today?
Yeah. So Canis lupus, wolves, and Homo sapiens have this super interesting convergent evolution basically on how our family groups live, how our social dynamics, and we are actually more similar to our family groups and social dynamics are more similar to a wolf than they are to a chimpanzee. And wolves are more similar to us in the way that they live than they are to their closest relative, the coyote. And so I think it just so happened that there was this social animal that lived in such a similar type of life that they fit so perfectly into ours. And it wasn't a big jump at all. I have wondered occasionally why early humans didn't domesticate hyenas.
Oh.
Because they do live in these big groups, but they are a bit more defined by some fission fusion.
Yeah.
Some they're not always together all the time. And they are fairly aggressive because they have to be living in a place with so many different other carnivores and living in such a large group. And so maybe that was just the difference between hyenas and, gray wolves that gave gray wolves this huge leg up. I mean, they have beat every other species in domestication by probably tens of thousands of years.
Right. Because even with horses was, much later. And sometimes I feel like I forget about that dogs have really... wolf dogs have been by our side for so long, and it just makes me want to go home and give my dog a hug.
Totally.
Say thank you for taking care of me. All right, next question is we have Allison from Colorado, and she asks, is there a reason wolves are different colors?
Yes. So in Yellowstone, the wolf coloration, it's kind of split 50-50. There are ones that we call gray, although they're really much more kind of this creamy tan color with some brown and black in there. Some of them more kind of rusty orange, some of them more gray. And then what we call black, but is really, some of them are pretty dark black, but other ones are brownish and silvery coloration there. But really those two color variants. The black coat color is actually dominant, and the gray coat color is actually recessive. And so there is just one gene that codes for this. Two gray wolves can only have gray pups because they're all recessive genes. Two black wolves can potentially have a gray pup if they both carry the recessive gene. So they both pass on the recessive to that gray pup. Occasionally there are black wolves that don't have the recessive gene. We actually have not found very many of those. We're not sure why that would be, because you would expect there to be at least a handful out there at any given time. But we do find that wolves look for mates that are the opposite color of themselves.
No way.
It's called disassortative mating, to find a mate that is different looking from you. But they also avoid inbreeding as well, and so they don't breed with first-order relatives, a father, daughter, mother, son, or siblings. Too much beyond that is fine in the wolf world. But yeah, finding a mate is a really interesting thing, and like forming these pair bonds, that's also a topic of some of our future work. How many wolves actually become a leader and have that bond with the other leader, whether that always leads to pups or not. Usually those bonds are broken when a wolf dies. What are their divorce rates? All kinds of things. And coat color is one of those things that is just pretty fascinating. They have slightly different survival, slightly different reproduction, different baseline levels of cortisol. Wolves in Yellowstone got, if we go back, I think it's close to 7,000 or 8,000 years ago. This happened somewhere around the Yukon. Mm-hmm. They've been able to link it back that a domestic dog, of course, looking very much like a wolf at the time, got some kind of a genetic mutation that made it have this black coat color, and then it passed it back on to wild wolves. And that's why you see black wild wolves in the Canadian Rockies and in Yellowstone, where those wolves came from. But you don't really see that in Europe or Russia or even like the high Arctic. And some of that may be coat color, as a means of not giving themselves away.
Smart.
Being black on the tundra would maybe not be a good idea. But it is technically a mutation that came from domestic dogs thousands of years ago. There have been some cool studies that show that black coat color gene itself is closely linked to the regulation of glucocorticoids. And so they are less stressed. They have lower cortisol levels. It matches up pretty well with some studies on domestic dogs, like black labs, compared to some other dogs that are considered like the red coat color dogs. We are fully like in the meat of coat color research right now, because it seems to be like one of those really interesting things in evolution that happened that maybe there's some selection for in some cases, and maybe just there isn't selection against, so it has persisted. And whether we'll ever really know the exact answer to that or not. But it's cool to see all of them out there living in a pack together. Of course, they see each other as, family members, like having different hair color or whatever. Some of them do get gray with age. Not very many wild animals do that. I can only think of, gorillas turn silverback, but that's really kind of more of a hormone thing for the biggest mature males. There are some giraffes that I think get darker with age because of the sun protection, but not very many other animals get, how people, as they age, so many people's hairs turn gray or turn white. And we see that happen with the wolves, like 907 right now. She actually stayed darker than most wolves her age, but her tail is all white, her face is all white, kind of like you would expect to see like a 12-year-old golden retriever or something.
Oh, that's sweet. Interesting. What about, are there any pure white wolves in the park right now? I know there have been some really famous, especially like the ladies. Some really famous female pure white wolves. And curious, well, like one, are there any in the park right now? And two, like kind of where does that coloration come from? And why is it so rare?
Mm-hmm. The lightest one in the park right now that is closest to white would be the alpha male of the 8 Mile pack, 1326. He is actually the son of one of those white females mostly their packs have lived in the Hayden Valley area. And they all were born gray, so that kind of like creamy tan, but turned white. They happened to live very long, first of all. There were 3 of them in a row, grandmother, mother, and then daughter. And now this one, grandson, I guess. So they happened to live long enough that they had enough time, but they did turn almost completely white. I remember seeing one and comparing her to like a little tiny polar bear. She was pure white with just a black nose. And Probably. We don't know exactly the mechanism behind that because it's different than like the black-gray genetic difference. There's an age component to that too. Probably whatever's going on with humans, it's very similar.
Got it. Interesting. I really like that. They're always, seeing one of those in the park always feels, but then it's funny because sometimes they don't even like register as more wolf-like, because I feel like I sometimes think it's just like a big old husky. And like I really think of like the gray, ruddy, tan color, and then the black is like really the wolves. And so it's always special to see those guys out and about. Kara, if people want to learn more about your work, where can they go? Or just like wolves in general, like how can people like learn more about what you do?
Our team, the Yellowstone Wolf Project, puts out an annual report every year. We are just finalizing the 2023 one right now. And so that will be available on the park website. We do try to print some of them. So if you see me or one of our teammates out in the field, ask them for a copy. And so that's probably the best place to get kind of like up-to-date information. We also published a book called Yellowstone Wolves, Science and Discovery in the World's First National Park. And you can find that in different places, whether it's online or at an independent bookstore. I know the Yellowstone Forever bookstores have it in the park or in Gardner. I think at the airport too, the Bozeman airport. That kind of synthesized the first 25 years after reintroduction of all of the research that we've done, and was a really nice opportunity for us to kind of like, here's what we know. And it has helped us to figure out where the gaps are and the things that we're going to be studying for the next 25 years. So very exciting. The park website where those annual reports can be found also has really cool information about wolves, a bunch of different videos that the park has put together. A lot of our scientific articles, at least the links can be found on there. The recent numbers. Yeah.
Love it. Great. Can't wait we'll share that in the show notes as well, so people can learn all about what's happening in the park related to wolves. This is a question we ask all of our guests on the podcast, and it's one of my favorite ones because I love hearing all the answers, is who is your conservation hero?
Of course, I can't just pick one, right?
I think some folks have chosen a few, so you're definitely in the clear.
I think near the top of my list has to be the brothers Adolf and Olaus Murie, along with Marty Murie and Louise Murie. So it was two brothers and their wives, and both of them did actually a lot of conservation and early science work in the 40s and 50s and probably 60s near Yellowstone in the GYE, especially down near Jackson, but then also up in one of my other favorite places in the world, up near Denali in Alaska and the Alaska National Wildlife Refuge. And this was mostly before, not Yellowstone was already a national park, of course, but most of the other parks were not established yet. And the Alaska Arctic National Wildlife Refuge was certainly not protected. And so they did a ton of work. Adolf especially did this really cool, like long-term observation of a wolf pack at a den. And I remember having his book as a kid, and he, this was before he could really like take photos, or at least it was too far away to take photos reasonably. And so he sketched out each of the pack members that he'd been watching for weeks. And I just remember thinking, and I'm still fascinated by this intersection between his artwork and the science that he was doing. And that's kind of what I aim to do with my work, really. I love watercolor painting, and also have started doing some more digital artwork to try and fit into communicating our science, to make it more interesting for people to read and understand, rather than just in a scientific paper and then it's over. And so this was at this point almost 90 years ago that he was doing this. And I love that kind of the take where it's science, but it's also thought of as art as well.
100%. Science and art needs to be integrated much more often. Kira, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Really love and appreciate the incredible research you do. And I hope to see you out in the park again soon.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Kira, thank you so much for stopping by the podcast and sharing your incredible work. We so appreciate all you do for wolves and science communication. Listener, if you'd like to learn more about Kira and her work, I'll place some links in the show notes, including her TEDx talk on lessons from wolves about the value of growing old, the Yellowstone Wolf Project's annual reports, and her Instagram account where she posts amazing photos and stories about her work and Yellowstone's wolves. The Voices of Greater Yellowstone is a podcast by the Greater Yellowstone Coalition, a conservation nonprofit that works with all people to protect the lands, waters, and wildlife of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider a gift to GYC to support the podcast, our conservation efforts, and beyond. Or leave us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts to help us reach new audiences and share the love of this special place. Also, please feel free to send me an email anytime with the Greater Yellowstone stories or fascinating people you'd like to hear more about. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.